How y'all doing out there? Good evening, everybody. I got a question for y'all. How much do y'all normally pay for sports tickets? And do y'all travel across the country or across the planet to catch a sports game? Because I think I've found the ultimate version of that. I've met people in this galaxy that will literally travel to a different planet to catch a game or match of their favorite team. And I'm not a sports person in the slightest, but hey, I gotta respect that. That's dedication right there. Hey y'all, and welcome to the Oblivion's Library podcast. I'm Haley Straub, your local intergalactic traveler, wandering the galaxy collecting stories, which I will share with y'all here. One of my favorite things about exploring the galaxy is that a lot of planets have a lot in common when it comes to sports and games, but it's really cool to see the deviations. Some planets are obsessed with badminton or pickleball, meanwhile half the known planets in the galaxy have a World Cup. Even the wonderful Oblivion's Library has many different kinds of chessboards set up so you can challenge aliens from planets you've never heard of. But while I was studying in the Oblivion's Library, I heard about a planet called Noxion. You see, Noxion's favorite sport isn't football or soccer or anything like that. Their favorite sport is roller derby. They have a whole industry built up around rollerblading. And as someone who personally loves rollerblading, I had to travel to Noxion to catch some roller derby because that sounds super cool. So when I was on Noxion, there were a lot of interesting happenings that happened during some of the playoff races. It was a photo finish race, getting all the media, an incredible week for the racers participating. So the story you're about to hear, I wrote about the roller derby finale that I witnessed last week on planet Noxion. This story is owned and copyrighted by Haley Straub. This story is not affiliated with Taylor University and may not necessarily reflect the views of the institution. All stories on this podcast are PG and LTC friendly. Today's story is called Ruby in Rollerblades. And it starts with a girl named Ruby who had just tripped, slamming her chin into the ground. She skidded for a few seconds before coming to a stop. Ruby's jaw was throbbing and she tasted blood in her mouth. Blurs approached her, and Ruby cowered as they barely avoided her. In the seconds that it took Ruby to recover from her fall, all the other racers had already left her in the dust, and Ruby couldn't find her footing well enough to pick up speed, and there was no point in trying now. The race was over, and Ruby had lost. As she tried to glide along the remainder of the track, Ruby balanced on one foot to inspect her left skate. Her rollerblades had served her well for years, but the wheel axles had finally snapped from the pressure. Perfect. Just perfect. The biggest roller derby of Ruby's life in an auditorium of thousands, and the axles on her left rollerblade had broken 50 feet from the finish line. The crowds were cheering and lights were glaring, which contrasted beautifully with Ruby's sour self-pity. The vibrant screens and holograms around the packed auditorium showed the faces of the winners. Ruby turned away, stepping off the track and almost losing her balance again. The off-track areas were floored with rubber, forcing anyone in skates to walk like a normal person. Ruby stepped and tripped her way to the tunnels that led to the locker rooms, collapsing on the first bench she saw. As the booming announcer's voice announced winners and statistics, Ruby tore at her shoelaces. Holding back tears, she leaned against the wall, letting her blood cool down. "Hey, kiddo!" Someone approached her in the tunnels. Ruby couldn't bring herself to look at Coach Jasper. "You gotta get back out there, Ruby. They're doing the medal donning and closing statements. There might be group pictures and stuff." Ruby wiped sweat off her face. "I don't feel like being with people right now." Coach Jasper grabbed Ruby's face and wiped off her scrapes. "You went down pretty hard there. Was it your wheels?" "The axles." Coach Jasper stood up and stared down at her. "Wasn't your fault. I'm not mad." "I'm mad," Ruby growled. "I had it. I was betting on at least 5th place. I should have changed my wheels or something. I don't know." "You didn't know, and that's okay," piped Jasper. "But what's not okay is moaning about in here during the closing ceremonies. You would want them to do the same for you." Ruby realized she had no choice. Sock-footed, she dragged herself up and walked back out to the main auditorium. No one noticed as she crossed the racetrack and joined the other competitors at the track center. In the center of the auditorium, a platform was set up with the winner's podium on it. But another girl was standing far behind the other losers, with broken skates dangling from her fingers. She noticed Ruby and Ruby's lack of skates and put the pieces together. "You too, huh?" Ruby silently stood by her and fixed her eyes on the announcer, who was conducting interviews. "Ruby, right? I'm Amy," the other girl continued. "I put brand new wheels on my skates yesterday, but they weren't worn in right. My wheels snapped when I was about 10 laps in." Ruby had gotten there just in time to see the winners don their medals. Bronze went to a boy named Kai, silver to a girl named Amber, and gold to Jaden. Of course Jaden had won. He always won. Resentment burned in Ruby's chest as she watched them smile and wave. Sorry, I'm back. Amy glanced over at Ruby. "You know anyone up there?" "I don't know anyone." Ruby rolled her eyes. "That's Jaden in the gold. We went to the same school. Dude takes this sport way too seriously. He wins all the best stuff." Amy sighed judgmentally. "Well, there's always next year." Next to take the stage was a man in a black suit with neon green accents. Ruby had never met him, but she recognized who he was, the sponsor of today's race, CEO of the best roller derby corporation in the world. Blade Tech Industries made all the best skates, best racetracks, and held the best races to show off their products. The CEO tapped his mic. "With today's wonderful race concluded, we here at Blade Tech Industries would like to publicly announce the launch of our newest rollerblade, the Blade Tech Variablade skates." The audience cheered as every screen in the auditorium played the same advertisement. New rollerblades with all the latest features that Ruby could neither care for nor afford. She was starting to get a headache. The CEO let the applause settle before he continued. "This race's finalists will race a rematch in a week to find the best skater in the city, and they will race in the new Variablades. But it won't just be these three up here. Where are the two ladies who broke their skates and didn't finish?" Ruby froze as spotlights and cameras zeroed in on her and Amy. She was so petrified she didn't hear the CEO beckon them on stage, and Amy pulled her along. Confused and wishing she had worn shoes, Ruby stood on the platform next to the finalist, next to Amy, and next to the richest man in the world. The CEO smiled brightly at them, then turned to his teleprompter. "For the finale race, Amy and Ruby here will race alongside Jaden, Amber, and Kai." Ruby's jaw dropped as Amy squealed with joy. The crowd loved the twist, and the media would too. The only ones who didn't were the finalists, and Jaden locked eyes with Ruby as his winning smile turned to a glare of disdain. Beside him, Amber groaned so loudly it was picked up by the mics. "What? They didn't even finish!" The CEO laughed at the chaos he'd caused. "The way I see it, Ruby and Amy raced so hard their skates couldn't keep up with their determination. I wonder how that determination would fare in skates as strong as they are, such as the new Variablades. Now, let's get some pictures." An essential part of being an athlete is knowing how to pose well, and Ruby put on her happy face for the photos. With the race's excitement dying down, the crowd was starting to file out. Ruby, Amy, Jaden, Amber, and Kai were escorted to the Victor's Lounge, where they finally had a chance to relax, kick off their skates, and eat. Ruby collapsed on the lounge cushiony sofas, reliving the last hour, realizing how lucky she was to be here. But the nice chill of the air conditioning was blocked by Jaden as he stood over her. His gold medal dangled inches above Ruby's nose. "What makes you think you deserve to race again?" Jaden demanded. "You didn't even finish." Ruby had known this was coming. Jaden hadn't even taken his skates off yet. But Ruby held her ground. "It's not your race, Jaden. It's Blade Tech's. They make the rules, so deal with it." "This is not cool," Amber loudly announced as she collapsed on another sofa. "Not fair to those of us that actually won." "Technically, Ruby and I didn't lose either," Amy pointed out. "Disqualifiers don't just get to jump the line to the finale," Jaden was persistent. "I didn't come all this way just to race against losers." "Hey, then what does that make Amber and I?" Kai stepped in the door, holding his skates. "Look, no one was expecting this, but CEOs can do whatever they want. And I don't care if I race against 2 people or 4. 4 might be more fun, actually." Disgusted, Jaden grabbed a sports drink from the lounge's fridge. Undermining all my efforts, now everyone's going to talk about you two raised from the ashes instead of me, the clear winner. Oh, look who's talking, Mr. Three-time champion. Amy climbed around the sofa to find Jaden. Can't you just let us enjoy this? Enjoy this? Jaden tossed one of his skates at her, and she tossed it back. At that moment, the Blade Tech CEO entered the lounge, extending his hands to the winners. There's my racers, how'd it go? His enthusiasm was met with awkward silence. Amy jumped up and shook the CEO's hand. The race was great, sir. Just thank you so much for this opportunity. My pleasure, he smiled. I know some of you may have mixed reviews on this whole thing, but this was my plan from the start. I want people to associate my new skates with second chances. Plus, it's drama, it's media. You kids know all about that. Jaden turned away and sipped his drink. This lounge belongs to you five, the CEO continued. There's food and drinks here 24/7, and it'll always be unlocked to you. The tiebreaker race will be a week from today, and on a different track, so you five will be training here. Tonight, you five should get home and rest. Tomorrow, we'll teach you how to use the ROLLERBLADEs. Ruby's social battery was basically dead by the time she was free to go. The locker room was cold and empty when she collected her stuff, including her broken rollerblades. Ruby considered throwing them away, but at least the right skate was still functional. Ruby walked out to the streets, where the busy noise of traffic echoed around the city. It was slightly raining, and the street lights and car headlights shimmered on the pavement. Outside the roller derby stadium was a single bus stop in the middle of the city, where Amy and Jaden were sitting on the bench. Amy was trying to make conversation, but Jaden didn't seem interested. Ruby tossed down her bag, joined them, and got to work fixing her skate's broken axle. Amy watched her. You waiting for the bus too? No, Ruby shrugged. I'll skate home. Amy was shocked. Skate home? Here? Where do you live? Just downtown, a few miles on Andesite Street. I've skated around here before. I skate around everywhere. Ruby's left rollerblade only had 3 wheels now, but it was better than nothing. A car pulled up, and wordlessly, Jaden got in and left. Ruby also stood up, putting in her earpods. See you tomorrow, Amy. It was nearly 11 at night now, and the roads were mostly clear. The rain made the pavement slick, but not impossible. Ruby listened to her favorite playlist of epic yet obscure songs as she skated home. The city was dark and empty, except for the occasional neon light. The one thing Ruby hated more than losing was being part of a living advertisement. Blade Tech seemed to have decided that since the racers were sponsored by Blade Tech, their every waking moment was a photo op. Ruby and the others were told to ignore the cameras, which they gladly did. Ruby arrived at the track the next morning in her old skates. When the Blade Tech CEO saw them, he laughed. You won't need to bring those anymore, Ruby. We've got the next best thing for you. He presented Ruby with a large shoebox, from which Ruby took her newest footwear. The ROLLERBLADEs were surprisingly lightweight, made of shiny black metal and plastic. There was even tech and pieces of neon on them, and Ruby was immediately grabbed by the realization that she was holding something more expensive than she was. As Coach Jasper went to town reading the instructions manual, Ruby sat down on a bench and strapped her new skates on. She began by gliding around the track once to get her footing. Ruby stretched as she breathed in the air of opportunity. There was a race coming in 6 days, and she had to be ready for it. The stadium was empty now, and already the pressure was immense. But the ROLLERBLADEs were surprisingly good rollerblades. They rode smoothly, the wheels giving the perfect amount of friction. Soon, Ruby was confident enough to pick up speed. She passed Amy, Jaden, Kai, and Amber with their own coaches at different points on the track. They were each testing out the new skates in their own way. When Ruby looped back around to Coach Jasper, she was met with excitement. Coach Jasper pointed to the diagrams in the manual. It says here the metal plate on the right skate is actually a switch, and it goes between modes. Hit it forward. Ruby balanced on one foot and hit her right skate once. Immediately, the skate's wheels retracted and were replaced with a single metal blade. They had been transformed from rollerblades into ice skates. It caught Ruby off guard, and she almost lost her balance. I'll have to jump and switch between the modes in midair. What happens if I hit the switch back? She hit the switch again, and the ice blades retracted. Ruby was expecting to land or fall, but her soul stayed inches from the floor. When she tried to look down, her feet flew out behind her. From the floor, Ruby glanced at her skates. There were no wheels or blades at all, only hover thrusters. And when she set her feet against the floor, some invisible force kept them a few inches above the ground. Hover skates, Ruby realized. I've never even thought of buying these. Now I'm supposed to race in them? Coach Jasper helped her stand up. Well, get your footing, figure 'em out. But the hover skates were beyond anything Ruby had any idea how to do. Since they didn't touch the ground, they didn't have any friction at all, making it near impossible to pick up speed. Ruby's feet only skidded when she tried to turn or stop, and she ended up clinging to the railings along the track. For dinner, the 5 racers met in the winner's lounge to rest and eat. The company was nice, but the conversation was tough. Since Ruby was a lucky outlier, Amy seemed to have decided that she and Ruby had that in common and could therefore be best friends. Ruby really wasn't interested. Most likely, she was never going to see these kids again after this week, so what was the point in making friends now? Ruby wouldn't even call them her friends. And while part of her wondered if she was missing an opportunity here, she was too busy focusing on the race to care. The Blade Tech CEO joined them, revealing that he'd been observing their practice from his royal box. Between his suit and tie and the racer's sweaty athletic clothes, Ruby couldn't help but feel the CEO was out of place, like he was trying to force his way into their group. Well, what are your thoughts on the Variablades? Jaden leaned back on the sofa. I think they're cool. Will we be using all 3 functions in the next race? Kai asked nervously. Or can we just stick with rollerblading? The CEO smiled coyly. Well, that's for you to find out. It's possible to race using only the rollerblade setting, but the ice skate and hover skate functions might get you an advantage. Jaden crossed his left leg over his right and cleared his throat. With all due respect, sir, I'm not an ice skater or a hover skater. Is that even a thing? I'm a rollerblader. I only rollerblade. Is that your strategy then? The CEO replied. Be afraid of learning anything new? I don't have time to learn anything new. The race is in 6 days. The room was silent as everyone remembered the stakes. What's new and unfamiliar might fail me. I'm just going to stick to what I know. What's worked for me before will work again, and as for winning, I'll let history repeat itself. Is that how you plan to get 5th? Kai joked. You're limiting yourself, Jaden. I'm going to take advantage of that advantage. I don't care if I don't sleep a wink this week. I'm going to master the hover skate and ice skating functions. Jaden rolled his eyes. What you're going to master is breaking your legs. Have you even figured out how to go forward? Kai stood up and moved his feet to demonstrate. Yeah, you have to dip the toes downward, and the breaks are similar to ice skates. He noticed the awkward air in the room and stopped. Sorry, I was an ice skater before I picked up rollerblades. It'll take some time, but I think I could get the hoverblades down. You'll have to show me later. Amy crossed the room to get a drink from the cooler. What about you, Ruby? She joined Ruby on the sofa. What's your game plan? Ruby hadn't thought about it. The ice skates and hover skates were potentially faster than rollerblades, but Ruby also hated anything unfamiliar. And with her rivals choosing different strategies, Ruby felt like she was picking a side. Stick to the old or bring in the new. It was a hard decision. Stay with what was familiar, with what had worked and had always worked, or switch and take a gamble on a strategy that may or may not be better. And whichever one Ruby picked, it was the deciding factor between win or lose. I don't know yet. She decided to play it safe as she grappled the argument inside of her. I'm going to test out the hover skates some more and see where that gets me. The evening passed uneventfully. Ruby's biggest concern had been sabotage by her competitors, especially the salty winner. Jaden was hardcore, but he wasn't a jerk, so practice went surprisingly smoothly. Ruby was the last to the locker room again, but as she was packing up to leave, a flustered Amber kicked the door open. They're not letting us take the skates home, she grunted. Amy peeked around the corner. What? The Variablades, they're still Blade Tech property or whatever. We have to leave them here whenever we leave the stadium. Amber shoved her Variablades in her locker and slammed it shut, then left without saying a word. Ruby stared at her old rollerblades in her locker. She'd fixed the broken axle, and they worked good as new. Except they weren't good as new, because now she had skates that were actually good as new, and they outshone her faded rollerblades in every capacity. Still, Ruby exchanged them in her locker and rode her beloved skates home. Ruby arrived the next day to find Kai already there. Coach Jasper let it slip that Kai was so determined to master the hover skate function that he'd stayed at the track all night long. Whatever he'd been doing, it worked, and Kai was zipping around the track without ever touching the ground. Ruby studied him a bit. The hover skates were similar in speed to rollerblades, but weren't limited by gravel or bumps in the road. But Kai did have trouble turning, which Ruby made a note of. When Amy arrived, Ruby skated over to the corner of her track. "Amy, do you have any advice for the hover skates?" "Not really. I've been procrastinating on figuring them out. I've just been asking around online if anyone's had experience with them, but the tech is just so new I'm not finding anything." "Then come with me to ask Kai," Ruby begged, "so it's not too weird." Amy agreed, and the two girls skated over to where Kai was packing up with his coach. "Hey, Kai, I know you're tired from last night, but can you tell us what you've learned about the hover skates?" Kai glanced up at the two girls, his eyes cloudy with exhaustion. But he was a teenager in this society. Ruby knew their shared culture all too well. Kai wasn't that tired from staying up all night. He hesitated because he was weighing the risks of sharing versus gatekeeping critical information. Finally, Kai shook his hair out and stood up. "They're hard, I'll give him that. But if you can figure them out, good for you. The hover skates take your weight into consideration. The hover thrusters keep the skate the same distance above the floor. You put more weight on one foot to push off or slow down, and it puts more effort into the thrust. That's how you start and stop." He showed them, and Ruby and Amy tested out his findings. Ruby didn't know Kai at all, but he was now officially in her good book. Who wasn't in her good book was Jaden, who saw Kai giving tutorials and jeered from a distance in the rollerblades. "You have literally no control in those hover skates. This competition's a roller derby, not a hover derby. The advantage will be negligible." "You know what's also negligible is the number of people who asked for your opinion, Jaden," Amy shot back. "Now you want to get in on this or not?" "Nah, I don't train with losers. It'll drag me down." At this point, Ruby had had enough of Jaden. She wasn't normally the type to argue, but something about Jaden's down-putting demeanor got her defensiveness riled up. Ruby leaned against the track wall. "Jaden, what color do you wear when you race? I didn't see you at all in the last one because you were always behind me." "If you were in front of me, why didn't you win?" he shot back. At this point, Kai turned away and grabbed his energy drink, muttering about how he was too sleep-deprived for this. "Look at him, Amy." Ruby nodded toward Jaden. "Jaden knows I match him in strength and speed, and now that I'm about to match him in performance, he's scared." Jaden scoffed. "Nothing scary about you. I don't hate you. You're just not a worthy opponent. I already beat you in a race once, so what's the point in racing you again? I'm just going to win again." Amy asked if anyone wanted to bet on that before being reminded that all of them were too young to gamble. Despite Ruby's protest, Coach Jasper insisted on standing by Ruby as she rested to prevent Jaden from arguing more. "If that boy's causing you trouble, I can get him reported to the CEO." But Ruby didn't mind Jaden's occasional haggling. She knew it was all in good fun, and part of dishing it out was knowing how to take it, but she still avoided Jaden for the rest of the day. The week was halfway over, and Coach Jasper had Ruby racing laps. She would do a lap in rollerblades, then switch to hover skates, and switch back to rollerblades, rinse and repeat. Ruby's heart pounded with anticipation as she got into her rhythm. Also starting today, the CEO had somehow frozen over a part of the track with thick ice. This allowed the competitors to practice the ice skating function on their skates, although the CEO was always vague when asked if there would be actual ice skating in the finale race. Ruby ignored all calls to join the other competitors on the ice and continued her training by herself. She found her rhythm, but as she skated laps around the track, one question ran laps around her mind. "Hey, Coach," she asked on her next water break, "what's better, to stick with a reliable old or embrace a superior new?" Coach Jasper smoothed out her hair and replaced her cap, hiding her gray strands. "Well, depends on the situation. Friends, stick with the old. Breakup, embrace the new. Technology, though, requires a careful hybrid balance." Coach picked up one of Ruby's ROLLERBLADES and played with the wheels. When I was younger, rollerblades could only go half as fast as they can now. A lot of the time moves on without you. You gotta upgrade or get left behind. But at the same time, don't fix what ain't broken. Don't forget where you came from, or the good habits that got you here. So use your new skills and technology, but use them to honor the old. Got that? Ruby continued to think it over as she turned in her ROLLERBLADES and picked up her old skates to go home for the night. They looked more faded than ever now. Just by looking at them, she could tell that the axles would crack after a few more runs. Jaden sat alone at the bus stop outside. The night was cloudy tonight, and the smog trapped the city's light pollution near to the ground. It was awkward, but since the bus stop was the only bench in the area, Ruby sat down by Jaden to strap her skates on. And Ruby remembered the first time she'd ever worn these skates. They'd been a Christmas present a few years ago, from Santa, of course. Vaguely, she remembered opening them and immediately putting them on. Because it had been too icy outside, she had skated around the kitchen on the tile. The skates had been a lot more colorful back then. Ruby's skates held a lot of good memories, but they had finally died of old age. Ruby had to face it. No amount of duct tape and superglue could save them now. It was time to embrace the new. Aggressively, so she didn't have to think about it too hard, Ruby threw her rollerblades in the nearest trash can. Jaden stared at Ruby as she ran her fingers through her hair. You taking the bus today? But Ruby shook her head and collapsed again on the cold bench. I don't have a credit card. She cringed as she thought of the ensuing walk home while she was already sore. But she didn't want to move just yet, so she sat there a while, procrastinating on walking several miles in socks. Jaden's car arrived, and Ruby politely looked away from the shiny vehicle and studied the clouds, listening to Jaden silently toss his stuff in the trunk and open the door. Hey, Ruby, you want a ride? Ruby was shocked. Had she imagined it? She stopped zoning out and glanced at Jaden. His dim green eyes were waiting for her response. Was he actually offering her a ride? Sure, Ruby stammered, playing it cool. She climbed in the back seat with Jaden and slammed the door, shoving her duffel bag on the seat between them. And a side street, right? Jaden confirmed, then directed the chauffeur. Ruby's father usually took the family car to work, so Ruby rarely got a car ride through the city. Compared to Ruby's family's car, Jaden's car was newer and shinier in all aspects. But it was also very cold inside. The engine was silent, and the car rode very smooth. Ruby considered making conversation, but Jaden had his earbuds in and his phone out, so Ruby stayed silent to be polite. Ruby was conflicted, with throwing away her old skates and the stress of the oncoming race starting to get to her. But the car's soft pleather seats and the cool lighting filled her with calmness, and she stared at the dark neon city, wishing they could drive through the night forever. They reached Ruby Street all too soon. She coolly thanked Jaden and started down the sidewalk. Hey, Ruby? Ruby heard Jaden ask it, but when she turned around to ask what, Jaden rolled up the window and the car rolled away. The next day, Ruby's mom gave her cash for the bus to and from the track. Ruby was still working on hover skates and was getting better at switching between the ROLLERBLADE's different modes. Today was the last practice day, and the competitors were filled with silent anxiety. And every time Ruby was confident in herself and her skills, Jaden would swoop past in rollerblades. Ruby couldn't deny it. Jaden was definitely the fastest out of everyone, and if the race was purely a rollerblade race, as Jaden insisted, he would be 2 for 2. But Coach Jasper stilled Ruby's fear by insisting that Jaden was only training for the past, by only improving what he knew how to improve. The second that ice skates or hover skates were necessary, he would fall behind, and that gave Ruby hope every time she slowed down. Ruby was getting better at switching between the modes, and soon mastered the jumping, hitting the switch on the right skate, and landing on a new terrain with new skates. The biggest issue was not losing her balance, and that became her next obstacle. By the time Amy met up with her for dinner, Ruby was black and blue all over. But before Amy and Ruby even entered the winner's lounge, they heard shouting. They slipped inside and silently joined Kai and Amber, spectating the drama. Jaden was throwing words with the Blade Tech CEO. Ruby watched Jaden, unable to believe this was the same boy that had given her a ride yesterday. Even with his hair tied back in his spiral headband, it was frizzed with sweat and fell in front of his face. "What do you mean I can't use my old skates tomorrow?" Jaden was saying. "I go faster and I work better in them than these new ROLLERBLADES. You get more of a show from me." "The point of the race is to advertise the new ROLLERBLADES. They're required," the CEO shrugged. But Jaden lifted his feet. "You just can't bear the thought of me winning and beating your Varia trash and my old reliables. I'm sick of these new skates." He balanced on one foot to pull off his right skate and hurled it into the couch. "All I hear from Blade Tech is vagueness and inconsistency. Let me race in my own rollerblades. Or I might not show up to race at all. I could do it, you know." Amy gasped, but the CEO was calm. He put his hands behind his back, his sharp face switching from casual and fun to stern. In an instant, he was no longer the fun-loving drama stir-up. He was the shrewd and calculating businessman. "Do you know how easy it would be for me to take away your latest gold?" he said lightly. "Or any of the golds you've won? Do you have any idea what I could tell your parents about you?" Jaden froze, with one foot in a rollerblade and the other bouncing on tiptoe. The CEO paced around the room. "It appears I must incentivize you further. I wasn't going to reveal this until after the race, but there's more for the winner than just the cash prize. The winner will have the option to become Blade Tech's celebrity, appearing in our advertisements and media presence, being sponsored by me and other races, and more. That should be good enough even for you, Jaden." Jaden put his weight on his right foot, the foot without a skate, and in doing so lost 4 inches of height. "Are you serious, sir?" Amber cried. "The winners get to be sponsored and famous?" "If all goes right." The CEO glanced at Jaden again and left the room, his green jacket glittering. The 5 racers were silent with shock, and Ruby imagined the endless possibilities within her grasp. Her life could significantly change based on how the next race went. Suddenly, the other kids in the room were no longer friends, if they ever had been. They were competitors. They were rivals. The rest of practice went uneventfully, all the racers taking it easy now that they knew the stakes. Since the new track was going to be installed in the stadium over the next 2 days, practice ended earlier than normal. Jaden's car was pulling up just as Ruby was arriving at the bus stop. She hesitated, wondering if his kindness was just a one-time thing or if this was the way of things now. But Jaden nodded for her to join him, so Ruby settled in for another epic silent car ride. It was the same as last night, only with the golden light of afternoon instead of night. Rush hour was hard today. But Ruby was so distracted thinking of the sponsorship opportunity that she hardly noticed when the car pulled up to the end of her street. An impulsive thought grabbed her. She wanted to repay Jaden's kindness, but didn't have a car to offer him a ride in. "Hey, Jaden?" He glanced at her. "You want to come in for dinner?" He was caught off guard, she could see it, but he played it cool and shrugged, pulling his earbuds out of his ears. "Maybe just for a little bit. I gotta get home." Ruby had never brought a boy home, and as she led the way up to her family's condo, she prayed her parents wouldn't make a big deal out of it. But Mom and Dad were very chill and made small talk as Ruby set her stuff down and raided the kitchen. Ruby pulled a Tupperware of yesterday's spaghetti out of the fridge and tossed it on the counter. "Hey, Jaden, throw this in the microwave for a few minutes." No, with the lid off. I'm going to make some garlic bread." "It's all yours. We already ate." Mom smiled at Jaden expectantly. "So, Jaden, what do your parents do?" Jaden was definitely looking like a fish out of water and glanced around every inch of the kitchen. His eyes lingered on the fridge door, covered with old pictures under broken magnets. My parents work for Blade Tech. I used to kind of live around here, but a lot of things happened, a lot of bad things, and we were able to move to the new high-rises." The microwave beeped, and Jaden and Ruby shared the spaghetti, making light conversation. Jaden didn't stay more than 10 minutes and seemed anxious to get back home. Ruby walked him to the door, and they lingered on the front porch beneath the moths that endlessly knocked their heads against the yellow lamp. "What, did my living situation scare you that much?" Ruby jabbed. "We're not that poor, you know." Jaden's eyes lingered on the doorframe, with its paint peeling off the metal. "No, it's nothing like that. I said I used to live around here. It was a dark time in my life that I'd rather not... No, I cannot go back to. It's nothing you did. Oh, also, there's no practice tomorrow, and depending on what happens later, I might not be able to drive you home. There was silence as the both of them thought about the race in a few days, and everything that came with that. Ruby decided to cut the moment short. They said goodbye, and Ruby went back inside. Sure was nice of him to give you a ride home, Ruby's dad commented as he flapped open the newspaper. And I know how much those apartments cost. He's well off. Ruby collapsed on the couch and rubbed her exhausted feet. He's a bit airheaded, honestly. I think he'll be easy to beat. From the kitchen, Mom glanced over at her. Is something wrong? There it was. No matter how old Ruby got, she could never mask the emotions in her voice well enough. Leave it to Mom to know when something was up. Jaden's my biggest competition, and I feel like there's so much pressure on me, Ruby sighed. It's like everyone saw me and Amy fail in the last one and get a shot at redemption. Now it feels like we're obligated to use it well, and if we fail again, it's just confirming what the first race already said. Mom came and sat by Ruby on the couch, combing her fingers through Ruby's hair. You know we don't expect you to win. I expect me to win, Ruby responded. They're giving the winner a model contract. They get fame and success on top of a healthy stack of cash. Think of what that could mean for us, what that could mean for me. Not just the money or attention, but the feeling of accomplishment. We could finally move. I could get a car. She fingered at the strings fraying on the couch cushions. Finally, after all this time, I could be the best at something. Dad was speechless. You got this, Ruby. You're an amazing skater. This is what you love. I hope you know how much your mom and I support you. Ruby took a deep breath and felt anxiety trickle down her backbone. Yeah, but nobody supports losers. You lost the last race and you still moved up, Mom pointed out. Yeah, by sheer luck. Luck isn't skill, Mom. Luck won't get me a sponsorship. It won't get me anything I don't already deserve. Mom sighed and hugged her. I will love you, win or lose. Ruby leaned her head against her. The day of the race, Ruby's head was stuck in a cloud. Absent-mindedly, she got dressed, rode the bus to the stadium, and wandered the halls to the locker rooms. Blade Tech had already given her a racing uniform, a red-hot shirt and miniskirt with metallic accents and logos. Ruby got the joke, red for Ruby. But after so many years of her name being associated with the color red, she'd gotten used to the color. Supposedly, the stadium's track had been changed, but Ruby and the other competitors were confined to the empty backstage spaces. They couldn't view the track or warm up until the race began, so they sat in the winner's lounge. Kai offered everyone his snacks, but Ruby's anxiety filled the holes in her stomach. There wasn't a lot of conversation today, not even from Amy. When the hour arrived, Ruby was told to wait in one of the tunnels that led to the track. She stood in the squarish darkness, balancing on her Variablades, staring at the bright lights and cheers that radiated in the distance. Hey, Ruby. Jaden glided toward her from the tunnels, wearing an identical uniform, only beetle green with shorts. And he was wearing the Variablades after all. Ruby tried to reply to Jaden, but her nerves closed her throat up, and together they stared at the lights in the end of the tunnel before them. Listen, Ruby, is there anything I could do to make you let me win? Ruby jumped back. Excuse me? I'm not trying to cheat or anything, Jaden assured her. I just really need the sponsorship and I need to win again. Don't you understand I have to keep my title? But Ruby was already fed up with this kid. You need the sponsorship. You have a private car with a chauffeur. You're a 3-time champion. Your old reliable rollerblades are newer and fancier than I could ever afford. She was sick of him. She was sick of Jaden, and she couldn't wait to beat him in this race and never have to talk to him again. Disgusted, Ruby turned away. Jaden took a spiral hair tie from his wrist and put it around his head, brushing his hair out of his face. I won my first race when I was 7. My parents decided he's a skater. That's his identity now. Rollerblading is my identity. I do literally nothing else, not even school. And I enjoy skating, sure, but if I don't skate, if I don't win, I have literally nothing else going for me. I'd be nothing. Something about that tugged at Ruby's heart. Out of all the things she felt about Jaden, she hadn't expected relatable to be one of them. Ruby sighed and crossed her arms. I know what it's like to be nothing. I'm nothing as well, Jaden. I live in the suburbs. I dropped out of high school. I'm not good at anything I do, not even skating. From the light outside the tunnel, a voice began speaking. Jaden glanced at it. I gotta get back to my tunnel. You really won't help me out? Why? Why not? Because I failed at everything else, Ruby blurted. Outside of my family, no one saw me as anything worthwhile. Not at school, not at sports, not at my hobbies. I need to win to show them they messed up when they gave up on me. So, sorry, but I can't let you win. I can't give up on myself. Not yet. Jaden didn't have time to respond and angrily dashed off into the tunnels. Ruby faced the lights and took a deep breath. The music began. That was the cue. She pushed off. Right foot, left foot. Right, left. Faster and faster, picking up speed, getting into a rhythm. She blasted into the light and kept skating. She and the other racers were expected to warm up by lapping outside the track to get good pictures and give people time to place their bets. She trailed Jaden from a distance, and Ruby scanned the new track. It was nothing like she'd expected. The lower arena had been enlarged, with a multi-layered track that twisted and split into multiple deviations. The track had jumps, wall turns, and places it crossed under itself. The quarter-mile loop had several paths one could take to complete a lap. Ruby wondered if Jaden had been right, if the race could be run on only rollerblades. And Jaden was certainly the crowd favorite, being the reigning champion and all. He was in green, Amy was in crystalline purple, Kai was in iridescent blue, and Amber was in gold. After she warmed up, Ruby slowed to the starting line, where the CEO was being interviewed by every camera in a 5-mile radius. He still wore his favorite greenish suit and acted like he was the most popular person in the world. Good evening, you five, he cheered as they lined up to the starting line. Clearing his throat, the CEO grabbed the microphone, and his stellar voice echoed around the room. I expect a good, clean race from all of you. I hope you'll make me proud. The competitors nodded silently, leaning into their starting poses. Ruby put her right foot forward, praying her skates wouldn't break this time. The world matched the racer's silence. Breath was held. Muscles twitched. At the CEO's gunshot, they braked. Ruby immediately cut Jaden off and gained speed early. The buttery track was ideal for rollerblades, and Ruby was soon flying through the course. Ahead of her, the track split into 2 paths, and Ruby veered to the left side. This track sloped down, then looped under, and Ruby cautiously maneuvered it. If she was doing well, the others probably were too. But Ruby couldn't see anyone and didn't want to risk tripping by glancing behind. When her path met up with the main track again, Ruby noticed a sharp turn. She step-turned it, moving her feet as if walking to gain sideways momentum. But as she did so, Kai slipped past her on hover skates. The hover skates, right. Was it wiser to use those now? Ruby stuck with the rollerblades. There were still 19 more laps to go. And whose crazy idea had it been to build a raised track with no railings? Ruby lapped the finish line and followed Amy down a fork in the track. But Amy's hands flew out as she skidded. The previously smooth track was now coated with a layer of ice, and Ruby seamlessly jumped, hit her right skate, and firmly landed in ice skate mode. The chilled air from the ice was refreshing. Ice skating was similar enough to inline skating, but the friction was different, and as Ruby pressed for more speed, she wondered if hover skates would be faster. She flipped to hover skate mode. Watching Kai and experimenting with the hover skates had given Ruby a vague understanding of how they worked. She ignored the ice and stuck with the main track for a while, hoping Jaden would come up to her so she could compare speeds. Eventually, Ruby got to the sharp turn again, and tried to step turn it like she had last time, but the hover skates had beef with friction itself, and didn't turn at all like the rollerblades did. Ruby slid right off the track, and since the track didn't have railings, she landed upright on the root underneath it. Panicked, Ruby switched to rollerblade mode to regain her footing. She didn't know if this would set her behind. So, hover skates couldn't turn. How had she not figured that out by now? Kai had certainly figured that out. He was zooming, but he couldn't stop well. Around the halfway point, he crashed into Amber. Ruby saw it on the screens. Both racers were knocked over and sprawled on the track. As much as Ruby wanted to help, she couldn't risk losing her lead and veered away to pass them both. Ruby continued in the rollerblades, her heart pounding as her legs groaned from the stress. They were nearing the final laps. Amy came up beside her. "Ruby, the sharp turn! It's ice now!" Ruby nodded and pushed for more speed. Kai was about 20 feet in front of her and slowed down when she called to him. Ruby passed on the message. All three of them made the turn seamlessly in ice skates. But Ruby knew something was wrong when she passed Amber. She glanced at the screens. Amber was a full lap behind. That may have had something to do with the fact that she was trying to rollerblade on ice. With Amber out of the race and Kai and Amy left in the dust, that really only left Jaden, who was neck and neck with Ruby going into the final lap. Both were ice skating over a curved portion of the track. Ruby was exhausted and kept telling herself just a little longer, just a little more. Her heart was ready to explode. The icy segment of the track ended, and Ruby and Jaden jumped and hit their skates. Ruby switched to hover skate mode. Jaden switched to rollerblades. But Jaden was too tired to keep the rollerblades going. Hover skates required less energy, and Ruby managed to pull ahead as they rounded the final turn. Behind her, Jaden yelled something and switched to hover skates again. Too late. He tried to turn, but as Ruby had discovered, turning with hover skates was hard, especially when you hadn't practiced in them. Jaden slipped, and his face hit the floor. Ruby felt no remorse for Jaden as she crossed the finish line. All right, that's it. That's the whole story. That is Ruby and Rollerblades. I hope y'all enjoyed it. Now, I'll explain the backstory behind the story. So, this story was inspired by my love for rollerblading. I love rollerblading. I skate around my neighborhood, all that cool stuff. I've never done roller derby or anything like that, but I love skating, so I combined my favorite hobby with some epic sci-fi. I got something pretty cool. I'm imagining that whatever universe this takes place in, roller derby is like Formula One level of hype. The participants can live off the salary. And it's definitely more scientifically advanced than this world because we see the skates can switch between wheels and blades and thrusters, as well as tech that can freeze and melt layers of ice almost instantly. So that sounds pretty cool. So this story was actually a short story fiction assignment that I had to take in my creative writing class last year. The original story was 3 pages long, about 1,600 words. It has now been expanded to 16 pages, was the one you just heard. I got the inspiration from a pick-a-date that I went on last year, which was basically just roller skating, and I thought, hey, this would be really cool. The original draft of this story that was only 3 pages long, much shorter, same story, but just super condensed. One of my classmates read it, and she told me it was nothing like she had ever read before. And those words, I really took those to heart. And those words are what inspired me to make this podcast in the first place. So in a way, the story you just heard is the thing that started this whole thing I'm doing. But what's kind of ironic is that Ruby and Rollerblades was the last story that I added to the docket. Today's slot was originally supposed to be a different story that I couldn't make work out, so I scrapped it for this one. And I'm super glad I did. I had such a fun time writing this. So the theme of this story you just heard that is the tale as old as time, the question of old versus new. Is it better to stick with what's reliable or upgrade to what's superior? I want to make it clear that in my personal philosophy, the question of old versus new relies on context. I believe in some cases it's best to move on, while in other cases it's best to stick with the old. But in the story, I had to pick a side. One of them had to win, so Ruby wins with the trust in the new worldview. The biggest rivalry in the story is Ruby versus Jaden. And it's not just that they both want to win, they want to win in different ways. Jaden prefers to use just the rollerblades, which the racers are more comfortable with, while Ruby experiments with the hover skates to use new technology to her advantage. In totality, Ruby, Amy, and Kai trust in the new and end up winning, while Jaden and Amber trust in the old and ultimately lose. So in this story, I symbolize the new versus old adage by characters using their left or right feet. Whenever a character steps or it mentions their right foot, it means looking forward to the future, while the left foot implies staying in the past. Like Ruby loses the first race because the axles on her left skate breaks, symbolizing how she can't keep skating like she has in the past. And on the ROLLERBLADEs, the new skates, the ice skating mode or the hover skate mode, the switch is on the right skate. Like this is the future. And same thing when Jaden is feeling hesitant about the new skates. He crosses his legs when he sits, and I call out specifically he crosses the left over his right, like his love for tradition and consistency prevents him from trying anything new. Now let's talk about the names for a bit. They are all gemstone names. I'm sure you caught that. I've had people ask me if the names mean anything particular, like a Steven Universe thing, but no, I just needed names for the characters, and I took what was obvious. I didn't think about it too hard. The gemstone names don't have any real symbolism here. They're more so you know what color the people are wearing. Like Ruby is in red, obviously. Amber is in yellow. Jaden is in green, like Jaden, Jade. Kai is blue, named after the gemstone kyanite, which is a blue stone. And Amy is like amethyst, and she wears purple. Jasper is also the name of Ruby's coach, because of course rubies and jaspers are both red gemstones. The only characters that really aren't given names are Ruby's parents and the Blade Tech CEO. It makes sense that Ruby would call her parents mom and dad, but I purposefully didn't give the CEO a name. Calling him by his title makes him feel more corporate and closed off, like he's not human. He acts nice to the kids, but they're really all just moneymakers for him, and so he doesn't deserve a name because of that. So let's run through the story really quick. It starts off with Ruby failing. Cool. First sentence, she falls on her face. I wrote that and I'm like, yeah, that's a good snap into the story. That's a good hook. I kind of like that. So Ruby walks to a tunnel leading to the locker rooms after failing the first time, and she talks with Coach Jasper, and Ruby wonders if she lost because she didn't change her wheels, which is already planting the seeds of making her wonder if changing her current strategy is the key to victory. And next, Ruby meets Amy, who is one of her closest friends in this race. Amy's skates also broke the first race around, but for the exact opposite reason as Ruby. Ruby's skates broke because they were too old. Amy's skates failed because they were too new. Amy says she put brand new wheels on her skates yesterday, but they weren't worn in right, and that's what caused her to fail 10 laps in. Amy tried to upgrade too quickly. So Kai, Amber, and Jaden are the winners of the first race. Ruby mentions that she knows Jaden from when they were kids. He takes the sport way too seriously. And since Ruby and Jaden would be getting the most screen time in this story, I wanted them to have a history together. So next we meet the Blade Tech CEO, the sponsor, the unnamed sponsor. He wears a black suit lined with green, and this is because Jaden also wears green, which immediately points out that Ruby's color is red and green is her bad color. Both her biggest rival and the CEO controlling this whole thing both wear green. Next, the CEO introduces the twist. The disqualifiers will race alongside the three winners. Once again, it's a race of past versus future. The past failures, Amy and Ruby, versus the future champions, Kai, Amber, Jaden. I thought of this twist when I first did the story, and then I had to backtrack and figure out why would the CEO do that. He mentions later he wants people to associate the ROLLERBLADE skates with second chances, but I have to wonder what would he have done if Amy and Ruby had not been disqualified. I don't really know, and I have a feeling he doesn't really know either. Obviously, the winners, Jaden and Amber, are mad about this whole second chance thing. You would expect them to be. But then Kai comes out of left field. And when Jaden's mad about racing against losers, Kai points out that also includes himself and Amber. I think with third place, Kai was almost a loser too, so I think he kind of sympathizes with Amy and Ruby, which is why he helps them later. Everybody expects Jaden to win again, or for Ruby and Amy to subvert expectations and win, but no one's really looking at the third place winner. No one's really watching Kai, and he knows that. So Kai kind of just does his own thing the whole time, and I think that's really cool of him. So when Ruby is about to leave, she considers throwing away her old rollerblades, like throwing away the past, but she decides to keep them. This is where we also see the way three of the competitors get home at the end of the night, which also ties into their economic situation. Jaden gets picked up in a private car, Amy takes the bus, and Ruby just skates on her own. So when the CEO sees Ruby's skates, a reminder of the past, he laughs at them before introducing the future, the ROLLERBLADEs. The Variablades, the ones they use throughout this, they're high-tech sci-fi skates with metal and plastic and neon and stuff. They match the colors of the races. They are so cool. I physically cannot draw them, so I don't even know what they look like. You're just going to have to imagine epic sci-fi rollerblade thing that can also switch to ice skates when you hit a button, that can also hover if you hit a button. That's really cool, right? Moving on. The next conversation is in terms of old versus new. It's super symbolistic. After trying out the Variablades for the first time, Kai is the first one to ask if they can just stick with rollerblades, but when the CEO is like, well, probably not really, Kai completely changes his game plan. Kai completely trusts in the future, gets to know the hover skates, and stays up all night training. And in this conversation, Kai also mentions he used to be an ice skater. The reason he practices the hover skates so much is because he already mastered the other two options. This makes Kai super overpowered. No wonder he canonically got second place in the finale. Jaden points out that he is a rollerblader, not an ice skater or a hover skater, which is a valid point. You would not normally expect a rollerblader to master ice skating, so I can understand why he's a bit mad. But here we have one of the most important lines in the story. Jaden was hardcore, but he wasn't a jerk, so practice went surprisingly smoothly. Jaden is the main antagonist of the story, but I wanted to make it clear he's not an evil mastermind villain or anything. He's not the type to sabotage or blackmail to get victory. He's just a rival who wants to defend his title and has a clear goal in mind. This is what makes Jaden an antagonist, not a villain. Ruby and Amy and Kai work on the hover skates. They end up winning. And at this point, Ruby is really debating over the old versus new thing, and she asks Coach Jasper for advice. And Jasper pulls the old back in my day thing. But Jasper herself is a perfect example of what she's talking about. She's an oldie who updated with the times and is now a coach for a future winner. Whatever Jasper did, it worked. She successfully hybrid the past and the future. And at this point, we get to the midpoint of the story. Ruby decides to throw away her old skates, rejecting the past and embracing the future. But Ruby doesn't know where to go from there, and Jaden offers her a ride home. Why? I don't know. I'm not sure what this means in the new versus old symbolism. They don't have feelings for each other or anything. This is when I was writing the story, and this just kind of popped in my head, and I'm like, okay, he's offering her a ride now, and in return, she can give him dinner. What does that mean? Why did he decide to do that? I don't know. That's just how the story wanted to be written, so I wrote it that way. What's it mean symbolic-wise? I don't know that either. Make your own symbolism. Do whatever. So the next big event in the story is Jaden arguing with the CEO because Jaden wants to use his old rollerblades instead of the new Variablades because, of course, he's embracing the past. And here it's revealed that the winner will become sponsored, upping the stakes of the story. Once again, Jaden is the old while Ruby is the new. Jaden keeps up the consistent side, giving Ruby another ride, while this time she proposes something new, join her for dinner. Ruby mentions it's even the first time she's brought a boy home. And while they're heating up dinner, Ruby tells Jaden to reheat leftovers, like the past, while she makes some new things like garlic bread, and once again the future. Even in their meal, it shows past versus future. So Jaden, being kind of rich, is really uncomfortable in Ruby's family's condo. They're not poor exactly, but they're not super rich either, and Jaden says the condo reminds him of when he used to live in that area, and it brings back painful memories for him. This brings up a sharp contrast in his theme. Jaden trusts in the past, but here he mentions a past he will decidedly not go back to at all costs. Even his living situation is pushing him to the future, with him living in new high-rises, but he still trusts in the past. So I had a bit of difficulty with Ruby's character desire in the story, because for the 5 racers, it's obvious what they want. It's too obvious. Wanting to win a race was just too broad of a goal, so I decided to try and add another layer, which Ruby and Jaden tell each other in the tunnels before the race. Ruby is nothing and wants to change to be the best at something. Jaden is the best at something currently, and wants to continue being the best at something because without it, he is nothing. Which is kind of an interesting opposite parallel. I hope y'all caught that. The finale race goes pretty straightforward, the racers' decisions of past versus future being put to the test. Ruby, Amy, and Kai all share a valuable piece of information, but leave Amber and Jaden out of it. Amber even falls an entire lap behind because she refused to learn the new technology. For the finale, Jaden and Ruby are neck and neck and on ice, and when they get to the track, Jaden goes rollerblades, the past, while Ruby goes hover skates, the future. And when Jaden realizes Ruby's going to win, he tries to switch to hover skates too, but ends up being too late, and doesn't know how to properly use them, ends up tripping and loses. This symbolizes how people that resist change until it's too late will end up failing. I find it kind of satisfying that the story opened with Ruby falling on her face and Jaden winning, and it ends with Jaden falling on his face and Ruby winning. So the original version of the story included the after party with some interactions between the winners and the losers, with Ruby getting her medal and stuff like that, her getting paid. But I kind of like how the story ends with a bang, similar to how it started out. Ruby won, and that implies that all the glories are hers, including the sponsorship, everything she was telling her mom she'd get, the knowledge that future wins over the past. The only downside to this great parallelism is that we don't see anyone's reaction to Ruby winning. I kind of wanted to show Jaden's reaction to that, but with the story how it is, you don't really get to see that. So let me know if you think I should add that. And that's the whole story. Let me know what you thought. I want to know all your feedback, either on my socials or in person. Check out Oblivion's Library on Instagram and Wattpad, and check out my YouTube for full recordings. This will be posted there really soon. And, of course, you can listen to Oblivion's Library live right here on WTOR Radio. I got to get back to the Oblivion's Library, currently on Noxion right now, and the sports fever is taking over the city. Ruby won, so we're having parties and everything. It's very red-themed around here right now, but I'm feeling kind of tired, so I got to get back to the Oblivion's Library. Until next time, this is Oblivion's Library, signing off. Take care, y'all.